FCC licensed full power radio stations have until March 1st, 2018 to transition to an online public file. Now, before we go any further, I also want to note that I am not a lawyer and nothing in this presentation should be considered legal advice. The transition to the online public file has both some pros and some cons for college radio. First, being online makes it easy for the public to access your public file, which is the point of having a public file. Now, many colleges close for a week or two around the Christmas holiday and otherwise might have gaps when their station is staffed, which can create a real problem if someone stops by to see your public file during that time, isn't able to, and then files a complaint with the FCC. Another major pro is that having all your material online helps avoid unintentional misplacing of the file or its contents, and protects you against intentional misplacement by a disgruntled former employee or listener. Another reason mentioned by the FCC is that having the public file online instead of allowing the public access to it 40 hours a week is that it improves station security. I was once on a college campus in a large city and had a free hour, so I decided to stop by the student radio station. I was greeted by a receptionist who asked whom I was there to see. I said I wasn't really there to see anyone specifically, so I was turned away. Now, had I thought to ask to see the public file, I likely would have been allowed in. But that does pose a security risk to legally allow anyone to enter your station as long as they use the words public file. Now, a con of having the public file is that it's easy for the public to access, which means it's easy to see when you upload something late or not at all. Now, it's not uncommon to see a college radio station fined at renewal time for admitting to missing some quarterly issues and programs lists. Now, if those missing lists are made public, it's possible stations will be subject to fines by the FCC, which could force smaller stations off the air when they can't pay the fine and the operating costs. Now, the first step is to go to the online public file website, which is located at publicfiles.fcc.gov. Then select Sign In the upper right-hand corner. That takes you to the Entity Sign-In page, shown on the right. To obtain passcodes for FM or AM radio stations, you'll need to first sign in to the owner dashboard using your course FRN and password combination. Now, if you don't know your facility ID, you can Google your call letters and FCC info, which should bring up your station's profile on fccinfo.com. Now, this example is KUCR at University of California, Riverside. Now, there's actually lots of information that you can view on fccinfo.com, but most importantly, it'll show you your facility ID. Now, to find out your FRN, there's a link on the owner dashboard where you can put in your facility ID to get your FRN number, just like this. Now, if you don't know your FRN password, which I certainly didn't when I first started advising, you might need to contact your attorney or whomever files your FCC paperwork. Once you've logged in, your next step is to set up your public file by selecting the Manage the Public File drop-down menu on the left side of the screen. Now, once you have things added, you'll see little numbers next to the items, like I have in my public file for WKNC at North Carolina State University. Now, before we get too deep into what goes where and how you put it there, I want to let you know how I set up my public file. I did it on July 1st, 2016, right after the system opened. Now, I remember the exact date because it was the Friday before Independence Day, which meant I was the only one at the station, so I had a few uninterrupted hours to focus on it. I was able to set everything up that afternoon. Now, I know it sounds scary, but I'm going to be really thorough with screenshots and examples to help you through it. Most of this basic station information should auto-populate from the information tied to your facility ID. You'll see your status, which should hopefully be licensed, as well as when your license is set to expire. Now remember, you need to complete renewal paperwork a few months in advance, So for this expiration date of December 1st, 2019, my renewal will be due August 1st of that year. Now, your main studio address might be blank, but I'll show you where to add that in a minute. And once you have all the documents uploaded, you'll be able to download everything in your online file as a zip file. Finally, you'll see the public and broadcasting manual that was required for your physical public file. This will show up automatically. Now we'll scroll back up to select the Settings tab from the menu bar, and then select Manage Station Logo from the next menu bar. This is where you can upload a JPEG or PNG file of your logo, up to 200 by 200 pixels. It isn't necessary, of course, but it sure looks nice. The Main Studio Contact tab is where you can add a contact name, street address, and other information for your station. Now, before we leave this page, I want to mention the other two tabs on this page. Now, the access token can be used if you contract with someone else to maintain your public file and need to grant them access. Essentially, a way to let someone else access your file with an alternate password. Now, it's unlikely you'd need to use this function. Now, you will need to use the Certification tab, which is what I'll show you at the end, to certify that you've uploaded all of your existing public file documents. The next item in the online public file is your political file. This is for political advertising, which is considered to be a commercial and thus prohibited on non-commercial radio stations. Now, every few years, WKNC receives either an email or telephone call inquiring about political underwriting for candidates. Now, I always explain to the person we're not allowed to sell political underwriting, and then either place the email transcript or a summary of the conversation in the public file, as I've done here in the 2016 local file, after a campaign manager called to inquire about underwriting for a local city council candidate. Now, you're likely to only have one or two items in your political file, if any. And in case you are curious as to what that political file said, this is the whole thing. Who contacted the station, when, and that I said we do not air political underwriting. After the political file are applications. Now, these will automatically appear based on what you've previously filed using your facility ID. You can easily toggle something in or out of your public file, which I've done here just to demonstrate. Now, you will have applications and a few renewals auto-populate, as well as any times you filed for STA, that's Special Temporary Authority from the FCC, and maybe something in the Others tab, which contains WKNC's Change in Official Mailing Address form. Next up are citizens' agreements, which, and I quote, are agreements between citizens groups and broadcast stations that are entered primarily for non-commercial purposes and that deal directly or indirectly with the station's broadcast services to their communities. Not all stations will have such agreements, but if they do, they must be in the public file. My station does not have any citizen agreements, so there's no files here. The next item in your online public file is your contour map. Now, this is the one that I was most anxious about, as I wasn't sure how I was going to scan a handful of very large maps stuck in the back flap of my physical public file. Now, this is another element that auto-populated, so I didn't need to do a thing. The next item in your public file is the donor lists for non-commercial educational stations. These are lists of donors that have supported specific programs aired by the stations and must be kept in the public file for 2 years from the date of broadcast of the specific program reported. Now, different stations approach this differently, but what I do for WKNC is export an invoice list through our accounting program's QuickBooks that lists everything purchased during a specific fiscal year. Now, since lists need to be kept for 2 years from the program air date, I typically have 3 fiscal years in the public file at any given time, updating the current fiscal year's file every 3 months when I upload the quarterly issues and programs lists. Now I name the files like so: WKNC Donor List FY for fiscal year 16-17 with no spaces. Here's another example of a donor list from Maine Public Radio. They update their monthly list with the names and addresses of their underwriters, listing whether they were underwriters on a specific program. And here are 2 more examples of NCE donor lists. One from WMNF in Tampa Bay, Florida, that uploads its underwriting contracts every month, and one from YWCT in Pensacola, Florida. There isn't necessarily a right way to do your donor lists, so that's why I showed you a few examples of how stations around the country are doing it. Your next item is your EEO, or Equal Employment Opportunity Reports. The FCC requires stations employing 5 or more full-time employees to file the following forms and reports on their EEO activities and put them in their public file. Now, the vast majority of student-run radio stations employ fewer than 5 full-time employees. So the reports you file saying you employ fewer than 5 full-time employees will auto-populate here. Next is material that has a substantial bearing on an FCC investigation or complaint to the FCC involving the station and of which the station is aware. Hopefully yours is empty, but if you do have a complaint the FCC has told you about, some or all of the material in this category may be excluded from the public file at the FCC's direction to protect, for example, ongoing investigations. The quarterly issues and programs lists is the most time and labor-intensive part of maintaining both your physical and online public file. A list of significant community issues and responsive programming a station aired is due 10 days after the end of each quarter. Now, if you happen to upload a file late, or not at all, it will be easy for anyone to see your missing reports. Now, I name all mine using this pattern: the call letters, an underscore, quarterly issues with no spaces, another underscore, and then the year and quarter, such as 1702. Here is an example of WKNC's quarterly issues and programs lists, which listed the issues addressed, along with the date and type of the program, when it aired, and a brief description. As with the donor lists, there isn't a right way to prepare a quarterly issues and programs lists. Here's another example from WRCH HD2 in Hartford, Connecticut, that lists the same information but in a different format. Next is an easy one: joint sales agreements. These are contracts or agreements that allow one or more parties other than the station's owner to sell advertising time on the station. Now, confidential or proprietary information may be redacted from these documents, but if you don't have any joint sales agreements, like I don't, then you won't need to upload anything here. This is another super easy one, as this was only required of commercial radio stations. Now, even if required of non-commercial stations, privacy reasons would prevent them from being made public. Now, there isn't even a space to upload comments, just a not applicable on the screen. The next item is your local public announcements. You'll need to upload pre- and post-renewal filing public notices, including a certification of airtimes and the text of the filing announcement. Now, I also include a printout from my scheduling program of airtimes, put all together as a 3-page PDF. Ownership reports are auto-populated into the public file. Next is political matter and controversial issues of public importance. This one will also very likely be empty, as it would contain a list of the chief executive officers or members of the executive committee or board of directors as applicable, of any entity that is paid for or furnished broadcast programming that is, quote, political matter or matter involving the discussion of a controversial issue of public importance. Time brokerage agreements are agreements that allow one or more parties other than the station's owner to provide programming, sell advertising time in the brokered programming, and in some cases, operate the station on a day-to-day basis. To summarize, there are 4 things you'll need to upload yourself: your donor lists, quarterly issues and programs lists, local public notice announcements, and, if you have any requests, your political files. You can also upload a station logo, and you may need to designate a main studio address. Now, there are 4 other items that will automatically show up in your public file: your applications, contour maps, EEO records, and ownership reports. Now, the other items in the public file either don't or very likely won't apply to your station. Finally, we'll go back to the Settings menu to the Certification tab we talked about earlier. We will then mark the checkbox to confirm we have completed uploading all existing material required to be included in the online public file. And finally, you'll have your public profile, complete with certification that your station has uploaded all existing public file material.